All right, so President Joe Brandon officially dropped his plan for student debt cancellation, and it's unsurprisingly pretty much exactly what we expected that it was going to be. I got a breakdown here from the AP on some of the details, but again, pretty much exactly what we would expect from somebody like Joe Biden, doing something that is marginally good and at the same time not going nearly far enough or using the full power that he has under his authority as the president to cancel 100% of student debt. So here from the AP, they say that President Joe Biden on Wednesday announced his long-awaited plan to deliver on a campaign promise to provide $10,000 in student debt cancellation for millions of Americans and up to $10,000 more for those with the greatest financial need, along with new measures to lower the burden of repayment for the remaining federal student debt. So again, I don't want to pretend like this is like completely terrible or that this isn't necessarily going to have good impacts on many American people. It definitely will. And so, I'm going to give him credit where, some degree of credit's due, while also, trying to explain how this doesn't even nearly go far enough and doesn't really tackle the underlying problem. Because if you're talking about something like student debt, you not only have to cancel, in my opinion, at least 100% of student debt, but you would also have to implement policies that were killed by members of your own party, corporate Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, who are against things like free community college and trade schools as well. So, it's one thing to cancel student debt, but again, a lot of these debt repayments are going to be starting basically next year at the beginning in January. And, a lot of these people are probably going to be ending up exactly where they started from with him canceling this $10,000. And you're also going to have people who are still accruing new debts because, again, you don't have any widespread publicly available free college. So they continue here with more details saying borrowers who earn less than $125,000 per year or families earning less than $250K would be eligible for $10,000 loan forgiveness, Biden announced in a tweet. And for recipients of Pell Grants, which are reserved for undergraduates with the most significant financial need, the federal government would cancel an additional $10,000 in federal loan debt. So basically, I guess, for the people who are, the most hard off in this country who do have student debt, you could be getting an additional $10,000, so $20K in total. So, that's something, I guess. But they continue saying that Biden is also extending a pause on federal student loan payments for what he called the final time through the end of 2022. And he was set to deliver remarks on Wednesday afternoon at the White House to unveil his proposal to the public. So I'm guessing he's going to be doing that at some point today. Now, one of the most annoying parts of this entire process throughout his administration has been that he's basically just been waiting for nothing. This is something that he could have done months ago. This is something he could have done the first day that he took office, and he's basically just been stringing along millions of people and leaving it somewhat up in the air as to whether or not they were going to get this debt forgiveness at all, let alone, the $50K that's been proposed or wiping the debt slate clean. So he's been leaving a lot of people in the dark, which is, obviously going to cause chaos in people's lives when they don't know how much they're actually going to owe and they're not able to make financial calculations based on, this vague information coming out from the Biden administration. So that's been, kind of annoying for people to deal with throughout this process. If you were just going to do this and go ahead with your original campaign promise, why didn't you just do this months ago? Again, just kind of stringing people along for absolutely no reason. But they say that if his plan survives legal challenges that are almost certain to come, it could offer a windfall to a swath of the nation in the run-up to this fall's midterm elections. And they say that more than 43 million people have federal student debt with an average balance of $37,667 according to federal data, and nearly a third of borrowers own less than $10,000. So I guess in other words, this could be wiping the debt slate clean for a third of people who have this student debt. Again, in my opinion, student debt isn't something that should exist in a functioning society, let alone the wealthiest society in the history of humanity. But again, for a third of people who have some student debt, this could be wiping the debt slate clean for them. And they say that about half of those with student debt have less than $20,000. So, again, I'm not trying to pretend like this isn't going to have a meaningful impact for these people who fall under this categories. It definitely will. But they say that the White House estimates that Biden's announcement would erase the federal student debt of about 20 million people. So, again, it's not nothing, but they say that proponents say cancellation will narrow the racial wealth gap, and black students are more likely to borrow federal student loans at a higher amount than others. And 4 years after earning bachelor's degrees, black borrowers owe an average of nearly $25,000 more than their white peers, according to a Brookings Institution study. So one way that you could phrase this is that it will help to lower the black-white racial wealth gap. But another way that you could frame this is, look, minority people within this country have disproportionately higher amounts of student debt, so maybe you would consider wiping the debt slate clean, and that would actually be an even bigger help to those people who are, having those student debts on their financial calculations. But they continue saying that Biden has faced pressure from liberals to provide broader relief to hard-hit borrowers, and from moderates and Republicans questioning the fairness of any widespread forgiveness. We're going to get to some delusional conservative responses to him doing this cancellation of student debt, but just the idea that like you're a moderate if you are opposed to $10,000 in student debt forgiveness is just completely fucking insane. But again, this is corporate media, what else can we expect from them? But we do have the polling data on this. They say here from the Hill that 60% support Biden canceling up to $50,000 of student loans. So you have a vast majority of the country supporting $50,000 of student debt being canceled, and they're somehow framing this as though you're a moderate, that you're a moderate if you are opposed to the $10,000 in student debt forgiveness. Again, just complete misframing here from the AP. But they say that the delay in Biden's decision only heightened the anticipation for what his own aides acknowledge represented a vexing set of political and policy choices. It's really not that fucking complicated, guys. You have the ability under, I think it's the Higher Education Act of 1965, you have the ability to cancel 100% of federally owned student loan debt. Okay, so it's really not like that much of a complicated political calculation. It's just complicated because you are a neoliberal ghoul who cares more about these attacks from Republicans and conservatives than you do about actually materially delivering for the American people and for average working class people. So, I mean, he's definitely been more caught up with, the perception of Republicans being able to attack him on this front, which is also just kind of ridiculous because you're going to see with some of the conservative responses that we've seen to this, they're going absolutely buck wild, even just on this $10,000. So it's like you are always going to face that backlash from these reactionary conservatives. You might as well have just gone the entire way, but they say that the people spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss Biden's intent of the announcement ahead of time. A little bit more details here. They say the Biden administration plan would also raise the income floor for repayments, meaning no one earning below 225% of the federal poverty level would need to make monthly payments. So that seems like another small part of this that would definitely be a good thing. But they say that Biden narrowed his campaign promise in recent months by embracing the income limit as soaring inflation took a political toll, and he aimed to head off political attacks that the cancellation would benefit those with higher take-home pay. This is an entirely bullshit narrative that I'm going to explain here in a second, but again, feeding into this idea that Biden cares more about these Republican attacks that are going to come and have come regardless of the amount of student debt cancellation that you are going to do. But of course, Biden fed into that and pared back his policy on student debt cancellation just to turn around and get stabbed in the back by Republicans regardless. But they say that Democrats, from members of congressional leadership to those facing tough re-election bids this November, have pushed the administration to go as broadly as possible on debt relief, seeing it in part as a galvanizing issue, particularly for Black and young voters in this fall. So the degree to which this will actually increase his polling numbers or increase the likelihood of young people showing out to vote for him, maybe on the margins, you could definitely see some improvements on that, but I don't think it's going to be anything super dramatic because again, you are means testing this, you're not wiping the debt slate clean. A lot of these young people, a lot of, again, disproportionately minority people in this country, they're still going to be having a significant amount of student debt. But anyways, now I want to get into what are the actual benefits of canceling student debt. So here from NPR, they have a good breakdown in terms of just the economic realities of canceling student debt, because you hear all of these different conservatives that are coming out right now and railing against this and saying it's going to worsen inflation somehow, and that this is a handout to the wealthy and this isn't going to be good for the economy, it's just going to increase the national debt. Well, it's 100% bullshit. And even the idea that people are framing student debt cancellation as a cost to the American people and to taxpayers, in my opinion, is completely bullshit, because that money isn't just going away. It's not just evaporating into thin air. That's money that people can then go use to start their lives. I mean, we know for a fact, according to the polling data that we have at our disposal right now, that the number one reason why people are not starting families and not buying houses, as they're about to get to here in this piece, is because of finances. So getting this debt off of the backs of a bunch of young Americans around this country will lead to significant economic benefits, not just for them, but also for the broader economy as a whole. So they say that the reason debt forgiveness could have a big impact on the overall economy is that a generation of Americans is making major life decisions differently because of the student loans. And they say that children, it's not about if you want them, it's about can you afford them. And they say that in the short term, as well as just, in terms of starting a family, as well as in the housing market, they say in the short term, it would be a very positive thing for the housing market, says Lawrence Yoon, the National Association of Realtors chief economist. And he says that his group's survey shows that student debt has helped, people delaying home ownership by 5 to 7 years. And again, home ownership is the number one way that Americans build up wealth in this country. And they say that he's not endorsing any particular plan, but he estimates that broad loan forgiveness would push up the number of home sales quite a bit. And he says home sales could be, say, 300,000 higher annually if people were not saddled with large student debt. Yoon says that would be a boost to the housing sector as well as the economy. Okay, 300,000 additional people on an annual basis being able to participate in, again, what is the main way that Americans are able to build up wealth in this country. So again, think about the broad impacts of canceling student debt. And they say that the effects would go beyond the housing market. William Foster is a vice president with Moody's, which just did a report on student debt forgiveness. And they said there have been some estimates that U.S. real GDP could be boosted on average by $86 billion to $108 billion per year, which is quite a bit, he says. And that's if you had total loan forgiveness. Okay, so again, Biden pushing needless austerity when the actual data on this is showing that wiping the debt slate clean could generate excess GDP. Okay, it could improve the economic situation within the United States, again, not just for the people who have student debt, but for the broader economy, for the housing market, for the ability for people to start families and to just buy things generally within the economy. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. But they finish off here saying that student loans are now contributing to what's perceived as lower economic prospects for younger Americans. And after all, millions of people are delaying home ownership, and that's the most powerful way for most working and middle class people to build wealth. And they say that a typical homeowner has a net worth of about $230,000, while a typical renter has only $5,000. So again, you see, even if you just want to make not a moral argument here or even necessarily a political argument here, just on the economics of this, it makes sense to cancel student debt. And again, of course it makes fucking sense, because how is this benefiting the economy, the broader economy, to have these people saddled with debt? Again, you can't go and invest in housing, you can't start a family, you can't make, other purchases that you otherwise would have, all in service of what? For a handful of corporations or, private investment firms that own a lot of this student debt and that are making ridiculous profits off of it. I mean, we're talking about what is better for society as a whole, not what is best for the people who are making money and profiting off of collecting on people's debt while preventing them from making those other steps in their lives available. So now I want to get into some of the narratives that have been pushed by conservatives and liberals in response to the prospect of Biden canceling some student debt. So here we had a tweet from Nancy Cook, who said, as Biden weighs student debt decision, Penn Wharton budget model has released its analysis of student loan forgiveness, estimating that it will cost between $300 to $980 billion, with a majority of relief going towards borrowers in the top 60% of earners. So the way that she frames this makes it seem like this is a handout to the wealthy, when if you actually go and look at the data here, okay, another way that you could frame this, as pointed out by the person who tweeted this, is that a majority of the relief is going towards borrowers that are in the bottom 60% of earners, right? So she was kind of just manipulating her phrasing of the data here, but I mean, you can see this in the bottom 20%, 20 to 40%, and 40 to 60%. That makes up a majority of people who are going to be getting this relief under Joe Biden's plan. So a majority of people who are going to be affected by this are in the bottom 60% in earners in this country, okay? So this is not a handout to the rich as conservatives are trying to portray it. But now we get into some of their statements. We have here from Mitch McConnell, this absolute rotting turtle. They say that Biden's student loan socialism, okay, Biden's student loan socialism is a slap in the face to every family who sacrificed to save for college, every graduate who paid their debt, and every American who chose a certain career path or volunteered to serve in our armed forces to avoid taking on debt. Okay, well, first of all, maybe people shouldn't have to go to serve in the military in order to get a higher education or to be able to afford a higher education. I mean, basically what he's talking about there is a poverty draft where people are forced into the military because they can't afford other basic life necessities. So, I mean, that's, kind of going against the point that you're trying to make, in my opinion at least. But also he taps into a similar theme here that we heard from other conservatives, here from Jim Jordan. Same thing as what Mitch McConnell was saying up there at the beginning, that this is somehow unfair to people who have paid their debts. He says, what about Americans who already paid off their student loans? Well, what about them? I mean, literally, what about them? I mean, I'm guessing you can see my response to him down here. This is just an argument against improving society. I mean, this would essentially be the same thing as if we had like a cancer cure come out tomorrow, and then people started arguing against it and saying, no, we can't give that to people who have cancer because that would be unfair to me and my family because I had a family member, my grandpa died from cancer, and he didn't have that cure. Or just in a more general sense, we can't give this to people because it would be unfair to everyone who's previously died from cancer. I mean, he's just arguing against improving society. That's what he's arguing against here. And again, the fact of the matter is we shouldn't have a society where people are forced to take on student loans in the first place to get a higher education, whether you want to go to college or you want to go to a trade school. You shouldn't have to take on student loans in the first place, okay? We should have education, a higher education, guaranteed as a fundamental right in this country. We can definitely afford it, okay? That's not a problem in the wealthiest nation that has ever existed on the face of the planet. But they're trying to portray this as like, look at all these other people who previously got screwed over by our broken and corrupt and dysfunctional system. You know, wouldn't it be unfair to them if we started the process of trying to fix that broken and corrupted system? I mean, it's just a completely lazy and ridiculous argument. But we had another one here from Steven Crowder, who said that student loan forgiveness sounds really nice to illegal immigrants, people with no life experience, people who don't have families yet, and people who use preferred pronouns. So not even going to touch on the preferred pronouns because don't know what the fuck that has to do with student debt forgiveness. But number one, undocumented immigrants in this country are not eligible for federal student loans. So not going to be benefiting any undocumented immigrants with this student loan cancellation. That's just number one. You know, of course, Steven Crowder is going to come out with a baseless attack on immigrants whenever he has the opportunity to do so, even if it's just has absolutely nothing to do with the issue that he's talking about. But he says people with no life experience and people who don't have families yet. This is the best point in my opinion, because this is a guy who constantly, along with other conservative propagandists, pretends to care about American families, right? And what he's doing here is arguing against student debt cancellation, a policy which would free up millions of people across the country, millions of young people, millennials, and even Gen Z people who have this student debt who can't afford to start fucking families. Okay, so if you're pro-family, you should be in favor of canceling student debt because that would allow people to go ahead and start their lives and start their families and invest in housing. Again, just completely ridiculous and lazy arguments here from Steven Crowder. But we also had Senator Mitt Romney, and this was honestly my favorite one of all of the ones that I've seen so far. He says it's sad to see what's being done to bribe the voters. Biden's student loan forgiveness plan may win Democrats some votes, but it fuels inflation, foots taxpayers with other people's financial obligations, and is unfair to those who paid their own way and creates irresponsible expectations. So a number of different things here. Okay, first of all, it's not going to fuel inflation. Okay, second of all, a lot of these people, especially like Steven Crowder, but also like Mitt Romney, complaining about government handouts. Okay, notice something down here, right? All of the different replies to Steven Crowder, as would be, you know, a similar analogous statement for somebody like Mitt Romney. Okay, this guy took a $70,000 loan from the government, the PPP loans that went out, and it was fully repaid. Okay, in other words, it was canceled. It was forgiven. So Steven Crowder coming out here and arguing against, you know, $10,000 in student debt cancellation for the crime of trying to get a higher education, while he and his company that runs his show literally got a $70,000 handout from the government in the form of a canceled loan. So again, it's just brazen hypocrisy. But, you know, when he says that it's going to fuel inflation and it's going to foot taxpayers with other people's financial obligations, my guy, you are the chief of trying to give handouts to corporate America, okay? Every piece of legislation this guy has ever been in favor of is a handout to the private sector. It is a handout to the wealthiest people in the country, okay? This is a guy who is vehemently against taxing the richest corporations and individuals in this country. This is a guy who has openly made arguments that corporations are essentially people and that they should be allowed to bribe our politicians like himself in order to, be involved in the political process and corrupt the political process. So the idea that like this guy is against government handouts is completely fucking ridiculous. He's just against government handouts for average working class people, okay? But the best part about this is the bribe the voters part of this. Okay, so in the mind of somebody like Mitt Romney or other delusional conservatives, it is a bribe to enact a widely popular policy that helps average working class people. That's a bribe. But when he goes behind the scenes and takes literal bribes, okay, actual bribes from corporate America to go oppose those popular policies, that's somehow not a bribe. Okay, in the delusional mind of somebody like Mitt Romney, right? It's a bribe to enact popular policies, but it's not a bribe to take money from corporate America to block those popular policies. Okay, just completely ridiculous framing here from all of these various conservatives, just absolutely no substance whatsoever. But Now we have a statement from none other than Bernard Sanders, who of course is in favor of canceling 100% of student debt. And he said if SoFi, a student loan refinancing company, could give its CEO a 92% raise last year, paying him a grand total of $103 million in compensation, and spend $625 million to put its name on the LA Rams football stadium, you know what President Biden can do? He can cancel all student debt. And he's 100% correct. And listen, this is what this comes down to, okay? Do we want to benefit the 43 million people in this country who have student debt payments, who could, otherwise be starting families, who could otherwise be investing in housing? Or do we want to continue allowing the executives and the CEOs and the, wealthiest people within society continue to get hundreds of millions of dollars off of the backs of those students? I mean, that's what this comes down to. We have a guy who's getting a $103 million payout for basically ripping off students and, helping to facilitate this continuation of, debt being put on the backs of people for the crime of getting a higher education. So listen, at the end of the day, it's obviously Joe Biden, typical Joe Biden shit here, pushing needless austerity where it doesn't need to be. But again, according to the data that we know right now, does seem like this could be a policy that helps millions of people, at least partially with some of their student debt. But again, it doesn't really get down to the fundamental problem here, which is that we shouldn't have a commodified education system in the way that we do right now, right? We should provide public college completely tuition free. We should provide trade school completely tuition free and guarantee education as a human right. That's where this process actually needs to start. Student debt cancellation and wiping the debt slate clean, even if Biden had done that, you're still going to have people who are having to take out student loans in order to go get that college education or trade school education as well. So at the end of the day, this is a policy that needs to be much more widespread in terms of wiping the debt slate clean instead of doing means-tested $10,000 or $20,000 forgiveness depending on who the person is. But on top of that, you also need to implement the policies that were blocked by members of your own party, things like free community college and trade schools. So, I mean, again, at the end of the day, typical Joe Biden shit here, but I guess he's going to get a little bit of credit for this and could end up actually helping Democrats in the midterms, especially with young voters who, as of right now, overwhelmingly despise Biden.